Brothers and sisters, something happened in the dead of night that could alter the course of African history. A single phone call at exactly 3:17 in the morning carried words that were not diplomacy but domination. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's voice was not an invitation to negotiate. It was an ultimatum, sharpened like a blade, aimed straight at the sovereignty of a small West African nation. 48 hours. That was the deadline he gave to Captain Ibrahim Traoré. 48 hours to restore mining contracts that bled the land while its children starved. 48 hours to reopen the gates of surveillance, to let foreign eyes watch every Burkinabe move. 48 hours to step down from office or be removed, violently, mercilessly, without apology. But here is where the story bends. Instead of submission, the young captain did the unthinkable. He refused. He hung up the phone. And with that click, he challenged not only Israel's power, but the entire system of foreign dictates that has stalked Africa for centuries. Stay with us, because this is not just another headline. This is the kind of story our ancestors prayed we would live to see. A story of dignity, of courage, of a people who refuse to bow. If you believe Africa's time has come, subscribe and walk with us for a future where no African nation bends to foreign chains again. The clock on the wall had barely struck 3:17 when the shrill ring of the phone shattered the silence. It was not the gentle rhythm of diplomacy, not the courteous tone that usually opens conversations between world leaders. It was the sound of intrusion, a foreign voice trespassing into the sovereign night of Burkina Faso. Captain Traoré, you have exactly 48 hours. Those words, spoken in the voice of Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, carried more than arrogance. They carried the weight of centuries, the same tone used when masters once gave orders to slaves, when empires dictated to colonies, when the powerful assumed that Africans must always bow. 48 hours to do what? To restore mining contracts that siphoned gold and uranium out of Burkinabe soil while its farmers struggled to feed their families. To reopen intelligence channels that allowed foreign surveillance to pierce the very heart of our government. To reverse decisions taken not in arrogance, but in defense of national dignity. And if those demands were not met, two choices were offered, both dripping with contempt. Exile to flee like a coward, abandoned and disgraced. Or surrender to hand over the presidency to hands chosen in Tel Aviv, not in Ouagadougou. The silence after that command was thick, heavy, suffocating. Yet within Captain Ibrahim there was no trembling. There was only clarity. For in that instant, he recognized the truth. This was not diplomacy. This was extortion. This was not an offer of peace. It was a declaration of war against sovereignty itself. He steadied his breath and answered. His voice was not raised, but it carried the strength of Sahel granite. Prime Minister, let me be clear as well. I do not negotiate with extortionists. I do not bow to bullies. And I do not abandon my people because a foreign power rattles its chains. Burkina Faso is not for sale. And with that, he did the unthinkable. He hung up the phone. He turned the threat of one of the world's most powerful leaders into silence. For a moment the room remained still. The only sound was the faint hum of the night air through the palace windows. But in that stillness was born something rare, a defiance that echoed louder than gunfire. Within the hour, his closest circle was summoned. The defense minister, a man who had seen battlefields scarred by insurgents. The intelligence chief, whose networks had traced weeks of strange movements, satellites prowling above, hackers probing digital walls, suspicious money flowing like invisible rivers. And the foreign affairs advisor, a careful diplomat now forced to confront the raw face of coercion. Gentlemen, Traoré said, his tone measured but firm, listen to the voice of the Prime Minister of Israel. He pressed play. Netanyahu's ultimatum filled the chamber. His commands echoed against the walls. The men listened, their expressions darkening. The defense minister broke the silence first. Sir, this is not disagreement. This is regime change. This is how superpowers speak before they destroy you. The intelligence chief nodded grimly. We have seen the signs. Cyber probes, money transfers, satellite tracking. They are preparing your removal. The foreign affairs advisor, voice almost trembling, whispered the question that hung over them all. What are our options? The young captain did not hesitate. Two paths lie before us. The first is submission, step down, restore their contracts, hand power to someone they choose, and hope they let me leave alive. The advisor lowered his head. And the second is refusal. Stand firm. Prepare for every kind of war, economic, digital, political, psychological. Every war but surrender. He rose and walked toward the map of Burkina Faso pinned to the wall. His eyes traced the borders, a small landlocked nation of 22 million souls. No nuclear arsenal. No massive army. No economic leverage. Just people. Sometimes, he said quietly, refusal is enough. Those words struck the room like a hammer. For in them was no illusion of safety, no denial of danger. Only the raw, stubborn truth. That dignity is not defended by numbers, but by the will to resist. The clock ticked past the 4th hour of the ultimatum. The palace halls were dim, but inside the president's chamber, the lights blazed with urgency. Captain Ibrahim Traoré did what no African leader had dared to do in decades. He reached for the phone, not to beg for mercy, but to build a wall of defiance across continents. The first call was to Caracas. The line crackled, then steadied. President Maduro, Traoré began, his tone deliberate. Israel has demanded my resignation. 48 hours, or they claim they will remove me. I am calling, not to seek asylum, but to declare that I refuse. On the other end came a long pause, followed by words weighed with solidarity. Then you are not alone, Captain. Venezuela stands ready. Should you ever need sanctuary, our doors are open. But more than sanctuary, you will have our voice. The second call crossed deserts and seas to Tehran. The Supreme Leader's advisor answered in the quiet cadence of the Middle East. Israel threatens to topple you, Captain? They believe they can dictate the fate of African soil, Traoré replied. Then hear this, came the response. Our cyber defense teams have seen their probes. We will extend a shield, invisible but firm. They will not hack your sovereignty. The third call went north Moscow. The Kremlin's secure line opened, and with it the weight of a nation long accustomed to confrontation. President Putin's advisors listened carefully as Traoré described the ultimatum. Their response was measured, but unmistakable. Should escalation occur, you will not face it unarmed. Our advisors can be dispatched. Let Israel understand that their threats may ignite something larger than they intended. The fourth call reached Beijing. The red phone line, reserved for priority communication, carried Traoré's steady voice across time zones. President Xi, Israel demands, I step down or face removal, I will not surrender. The Chinese. The leader's words came back calm, almost scholarly. Captain, resistance requires bread as well as bravery. Let us discuss partnerships, trade, infrastructure, investment, to replace the contracts they use as chains. Africa must learn not only to refuse, but to rebuild. 4 calls, 4 promises. 4 pillars rising around a small landlocked nation. What Netanyahu expected was isolation. What he faced instead was the beginning of a global counterweight. For 20 relentless hours, Traoré continued. Video conferences with leaders who knew the taste of sanctions. Encrypted conversations with intelligence chiefs trained in countering destabilization. Technical consultations with experts in resisting regime change operations. Piece by piece, a network formed not of submission, but of survival. But the greatest reinforcement did not come from Caracas, Tehran, Moscow, or Beijing. It came from within. The news of Netanyahu's ultimatum had leaked not from the Burkina Faso government, but from Israeli sources too arrogant to hide their threats. By dawn, radio waves across Burkina Faso crackled with the story. Prime Minister Netanyahu gives President Traoré 48 hours to surrender. The response was immediate. Students marched through Ouagadougou, their signs painted in bold strokes. Netanyahu cannot choose our president. Market women closed their stalls chanting, our sovereignty is not for sale. Factory workers left their machines idle, gathering in the streets to declare, we choose Traoré, not Tel Aviv. And beyond the borders, a ripple turned to a wave. African leaders convened emergency sessions. Mali declared, if they can remove you, they can remove any of us. Niger's parliament issued a statement condemning the ultimatum as an attack on African sovereignty. Ghana called for the African Union to meet in urgent session. Suddenly, Netanyahu's maneuver to isolate a young African captain was isolating Israel instead. His ultimatum, designed to break a single leader, was forging a continental shield. By hour 20 of the 48, Traoré leaned back in his chair. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice roughened by sleeplessness. But his resolve glowed like fire. He had not cowered, he had not yielded. He had turned the ultimatum into an anthem. And as the phones continued to ring, one truth became undeniable. This was no longer the story of a small country facing a superpower. It was the story of a continent standing behind a captain. Brothers and sisters, if you believe this is what Africa needed all along, say amen in the comments below. By the 30th hour of Netanyahu's ultimatum, the streets of Ouagadougou were no longer quiet. From the university gates to the crowded markets, voices rose in unison. This was not the sound of panic. It was the rhythm of defiance. Students painted banners in the colors of the national flag. Netanyahu cannot choose our president. Their chants echoed through the avenues. Market women, those whose hands fed the city each morning, closed their stalls and stood shoulder to shoulder in the blazing Sunday. Our sovereignty is not for sale, they declared, their voices carrying like drums across the capital. Even the workers in the factories, men and women who had labored through years of hardship, abandoned their machines to gather in the squares. Their message was clear: we choose Traoré, not Tel Aviv. Word spread far beyond the capital. From Bobo Dioulasso in the west to Kaya in the north, from small villages to dusty crossroads, citizens poured out to make themselves visible. They carried no weapons. Their shield was unity, their weapon was dignity. Israel had expected silence, maybe fear. Instead, it faced a tidal wave of people who would rather walk the streets unarmed than allow one man in a foreign capital to dictate their fate. But Israel did not remain still. By the 36th hour, the counterattack had begun not with tanks or planes, but with invisible weapons. First came the economic blows. Banking systems flickered, transactions stalled. Rumors spread of frozen accounts. Then came the cyber strike. Communications faltered, grid fluctuations rippled through the capital, and strange messages filled social media. Fake videos appeared, claiming the president had fled. Fabricated bank accounts proved corruption. Anonymous voices on radio waves called for resignation. The aim was simple: break the trust between leader and people. Yet every lie was met with swift resistance. Encrypted channels remained live. Distributed power kept hospitals lit. Within minutes, the false reports were debunked. Where foreign disinformation sought to fracture, local truth united. Then came the media offensive. Western headlines flooded the airwaves. Authoritarianism in Burkina Faso, democratic backsliding, instability in the Sahel. They spoke not of Netanyahu's ultimatum, but of Traoré's defiance, painting sovereignty as recklessness. But the people saw through the smokescreen. They knew that when the foreign press screamed instability, it often meant a nation refusing to kneel. By hour 40, something remarkable was happening. The African Union convened an emergency session. Delegates from across the continent raised their voices, not to caution, but to condemn. Mali declared, if they can remove him, they can remove any of us. Niger thundered. An attack on Burkina sovereignty is an attack on African sovereignty. Ghana called for a resolution defending elected governments from coercion. Chad placed its forces on high alert, signaling that any invasion of Burkina Faso would not go unanswered. The ultimatum meant to isolate Burkina Faso had done the opposite. It had bound the continent together. Netanyahu had lit a fire, but the flames did not consume Ouagadougou. They illuminated all of Africa. The crowds outside the presidential palace swelled by the hour. They did not demand compromise. They demanded resistance. Trostes, they chanted. 48 hours? Try 48 years. In those chants lay something far greater than politics. They carried the weight of centuries of struggle, the voices of ancestors who had resisted chains, plantations, and foreign flags. Now their descendants stood tall, declaring to the world, Africa will not bow. Brothers and sisters, remember this moment. The people of Burkina Faso were not led by fear. They led their leader with courage. And together, they turned 48 hours of intimidation into 48 hours of inspiration. This was the hour when Israel learned that a threat against one African nation could awaken an entire continent. This was the hour when Burkina Faso latest news became not a headline of despair, but a banner of hope. By the 45th hour, the air in Ouagadougou felt electric, heavy with anticipation. The deadline loomed, yet the city did not cower. Instead, it pulsed with chants, banners, and the steady roar of 22 million hearts refusing to yield. Inside the palace, Captain Ibrahim Traoré sat at his desk, the ultimatum's end now only 3 hours away. The phone rang again. This time it was not Netanyahu's voice, but Israel's foreign minister, softened, stripped of its earlier arrogance. President Traore, the minister began cautiously, perhaps there has been some misunderstanding in previous communications. We could discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement, contracts restored, partnerships reconsidered, and peace maintained. The young captain's reply was swift and unwavering. There is no misunderstanding. Your prime minister gave me 48 hours to surrender my presidency or face removal. I have chosen neither. I have chosen to stand. Tell him this. Captain Traore is not leaving his post. Burkina Faso is not surrendering its sovereignty. The age of dictating terms to Africans ended the moment you threatened the wrong man. The minister fell silent. And for the first time since the ultimatum was issued, the threat lost its teeth. Hour 46, disinformation still trickled in. Western headlines still tried to frame Traoré as reckless. Yet each attempt was drowned by the louder story unfolding on the ground. A people united, a continent stirred, and a leader who refused to bend. Hour 47. Across Africa, parliament halls echoed with defiance. Leaders from Mali, Niger, Ghana, and Chad repeated one message: if Burkina Faso falls, we all fall. The African Union drafted emergency resolutions, warning that coercive diplomacy against one member would be treated as an assault on all. For the first time in living memory, Africa spoke not in fragments but in chorus. And then came the 48th hour. The deadline. The moment Netanyahu had promised destruction. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stepped onto the balcony of the presidential palace. Below him stretched a sea of faces, unbroken and unafraid. He raised his hand, and the chants fell to silence. He ordered me to step down, Traoré declared, his voice carrying across the night. He ordered me to surrender your sovereignty. And yet here I stand. Here you stand. Here Burkina Faso remains free. The crowd erupted, their thunder drowning out the silence from Tel Aviv. No invasion came, no cyberstorm, no orchestrated collapse, only silence. Silence from those who had promised fire but found themselves confronted by steel. That night, 48 hours became more than a deadline. It became a symbol. The Ouagadougou Protocol was drafted in its wake, a continental agreement that no African nation would face coercive diplomacy alone again. 23 nations signed, pledging economic, diplomatic, and if necessary, military support. The African Monetary Union accelerated plans for a trade system denominated in African currency, no longer tied to foreign chains. The African Internet Infrastructure Project advanced, ensuring communications no longer had to pass through European or American routes. Even cultural life shifted. In music, in film, in poetry, the phrase 48 hours became a chant of defiance, a hymn of dignity, and the world took notice. In New York, at the United Nations, Traoré stood as chair of Africa's Sovereignty Committee. His words cut through the assembly. A foreign leader gave me 48 hours to choose between office and principle. He believed phone calls could bend Africa. He was wrong. We are not anti-anyone. We are pro-dignity, pro-sovereignty, pro-democracy. No nation, however powerful, may threaten elected leaders into submission. The chamber rose to its feet. Africa stood first. Latin America followed. Then Asia, small island states, and even fragments of Europe. It was not applause for one man. It was applause for a continent that had found its voice. Brothers and sisters, Netanyahu's ultimatum failed because it underestimated what it means to threaten a people who have nothing left to lose but their chains. 48 hours did not end in fear. It ended in freedom. And from that day forward, whenever Africa hears the sound of an ultimatum, it will answer with the silence of defiance and the roar of unity. This was not just Burkina Faso's victory. It was Africa's declaration that submission has expired and sovereignty has no deadline. Brothers and sisters, when the clock struck the 48th hour, the ultimatum expired but a new era began. Israel expected silence. Instead, it was forced to hear the voice of a continent. They expected submission. Instead, they witnessed defiance. They expected a young captain to flee. Instead, they saw him rise as a symbol of sovereignty. What do we carry from these 48 hours? That threats only work when we believe them. That ultimatums only bind us if we bow. That dignity is not a gift handed down by foreign powers, it is the inheritance of every African child. From the streets of Ouagadougou to the chambers of the African Union, one message now echoes: Africa will not kneel, not to Israel, not to France, not to Washington, not to anyone who believes that our minerals, our governments, our very futures can be dictated by the stroke of a pen in a foreign capital. And the world has seen it. In the aftermath, Captain Ibrahim's latest news did not speak of surrender. It spoke of survival. It spoke of a man who refused to hang his head, and a people who refused to be bought. It spoke of a continent where 48 hours of intimidation became 48 hours of liberation. But this story is not finished. The next chapters are still being written in the hands of African leaders who now know they can resist, in the voices of African youth who now sing that sovereignty is possible, and in the hearts of elders who see, at last, a glimpse of the future they prayed for. So we ask you, what happens next? Will Africa rise stronger after this? Was this the true beginning of continental independence? If you believe so, let your voice be heard. Write it in the comments. Africa rise. And if this story moved something in your chest, do not scroll past. Like, share, speak, subscribe because they hid our history long enough. It is time to speak our future out loud. Thank you for standing with us. Thank you for remembering that 48 hours can change history. We will see you in the next story, the kind they still don't want you to hear. This is not the end. This is the beginning. Captain Ibrahim, latest news. Burkina Faso, latest news. Africa's news told by us, for us, with dignity unshaken.